Massive wolf-like creature stood at the corral fence. Terry Sherman, rifle raised, fired, not once, but multiple times, point blank. The bullets slammed into the animal's hide, yet it showed no blood, no recoil, no visible injury. It simply turned and walked away, utterly unfazed. This wasn't a natural predator. This was an impossible, bulletproof entity on Skinwalker Ranch, and it was just the beginning.
Skinwalker Ranch, a remote 512-acre property nestled in the rugged Uinta Basin of northeastern Utah, stands as one of history's most intensely documented epicenters of anomalous phenomena. Located southeast of Ballard in Uinta County, its physical landscape is a stark tableau of dusty plains, dense thickets of indigenous plants, and dramatic, jagged mesas of quartz-bearing sandstone. These geological formations run directly along the borders of the Uinta and RA Indian Reservation, a detail that, as we'll see, holds centuries of significance. This specific geographic coordinate has transitioned through a remarkable taxonomy of human interaction over time. It has moved from being a strictly quarantined indigenous spiritual landscape to a quiet, localized agrarian homestead, and perhaps most strikingly, it has emerged as a highly classified laboratory for United States military intelligence and advanced geophysical surveillance. The phenomena reported at Skinwalker Ranch are distinguished not only by their sheer volume, but by their profoundly multifaceted nature. The documented observations span a dizzying array of incidents, from localized electromagnetic anomalies and sharp spikes in ionized radiation to structured unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAP, and severe biological effects on human observers. There have also been inexplicable macrophysical events like the surgical mutilations of cattle, which defy conventional explanation. Consequently, the site demands a rigorous, interdisciplinary analytical framework, one that refuses to artificially isolate variables or compartmentalize the strange occurrences.
Only by synthesizing centuries of Native American ethnographic history, detailed longitudinal property and agricultural records, highly classified Pentagon-funded aerospace investigations, and contemporary sensor-driven geophysical models can a nuanced and comprehensive understanding of this extraordinary property begin to emerge. This exhaustive, expert-level analysis traces the ranch's entire chronological history, from its earliest mythological foundations to the current state-of-the-art scientific investigations that define its modern era.
To truly comprehend the contemporary stigmatization and anomalous footprint of the Uinta Basin, we must first delve into the deep ethnohistorical context of the region, a context that predates modern scientific inquiry by many centuries. The Ute people, who hold historical sovereignty over this basin, possess an extensive historical and cultural memory of the landscape. They assert their presence in the region extends back at least 15 generations, indicating a deep ancestral connection to the land. Within traditional Ute cosmology, the land in and around the ranch is not merely passive geographic space. It's a highly charged spiritual landscape, containing designated exclusionary zones. These are places where activity is either forbidden or fraught with spiritual danger. The specific nomenclature of the ranch, Skinwalker Ranch, derives directly from the Navajo term Yi-Nadloshi, which is commonly translated as the Skinwalker. Within traditional Navajo or Diné culture, a skinwalker is strictly defined. It is not a cryptid or natural biological entity, but rather a malevolent human actor, a corrupted shaman or witch who has perverted sacred spiritual teachings and the witchery way for personal gain. These entities are believed to possess terrifying abilities, shape-shifting into various animals like wolves, coyotes, or bears, manipulating human perception and inflicting severe psychological or even physical harm.
Furthermore, tribal lore suggests that these practitioners occasionally take possession of individuals who are unfortunate enough to lock eyes with them, effectively stealing the victim's essence and strength. The presence of such deeply embedded Navajo mythology within traditional Ute territory is not accidental. It's the direct result of profound historical conflicts and territorial disputes between the two tribes. The historical relationship between the Ute and the Navajo was characterized by deep acrimony, friction, and periodic violence. Anthropological and historical records consistently indicate that the Navajo were an expansionist and aggressive population during key periods of the region's history, frequently encroaching upon Ute territory near modern-day Pagosa Springs and Durango, and actively participating in the capture and subjugation of Ute slaves. According to enduring indigenous oral traditions, during a peak period of intertribal hostility, Navajo practitioners deliberately unleashed the curse of the Skinwalker upon the Ute as a mechanism of asymmetrical spiritual warfare. It was a spiritual weapon designed to torment and destabilize. The Ute's response to this enduring curse is characterized by strict geographic quarantine. Even modern Ute populations maintain a rigid avoidance of the ranch property, believing that the Skinwalkers do not necessarily reside openly on the plains of the ranch.
Instead, they utilize the adjacent geological feature known as Dark Canyon as a primary redoubt and staging ground, a place where they retreat and plan their spiritual assaults. The deeper analytical insight derived from this ethnography suggests that the curse of the Skinwalker may in fact function as a cultural encoding of a genuine, localized environmental or geophysical hazard. Indigenous oral traditions frequently utilize mythological frameworks to catalog and warn against invisible environmental dangers that their people had no scientific vocabulary to describe. These could be toxic outgassing, extreme magnetic anomalies, or localized disease vectors. The strict, multi-generational quarantine of the property by the Ute implies a longitudinal recognition of acute biological or psychological risks associated with the specific geology of the localized Mesa and Basin, a recognition that existed long before Western scientific instruments were capable of quantifying such anomalies.
The transition of the property from indigenous territory to a formalized agrarian plot introduces one of the most perplexing historical contradictions in the ranch's documented history. For a continuous period of approximately 60 years, beginning in 1934, the property was owned and operated by Kenneth and Edith Myers. As the foundational Western homesteaders of the modern ranch, the Myers family utilized the 512 acres primarily for traditional agricultural and livestock purposes, residing on the property and, by all outward appearances, maintaining a quiet, rural existence. Upon the eventual passing of Kenneth and Edith Myers, the property was inherited by Garth Myers, who eventually sold the ranch in 1994. In subsequent historical evaluations, public inquiries, and journalistic interviews, Garth Myers has vehemently denied that the family experienced any form of anomalous, paranormal, or UFO-related activity during their 6-decade tenure on the land. Furthermore, Myers actively disputed the existence of heavily sensationalized security measures later attributed to the property by subsequent owners and authors. Specifically, he disputed the claim that the family had installed heavy deadbolts on both the inside and outside of interior doors and windows. He categorically refuted the existence of a restrictive digging clause in the real estate contract that allegedly required the new owners to notify the Myers family before disturbing the earth.
However, this 60-year period of alleged quietude and normalcy on the ranch itself stands in stark, highly documented contrast to the experiences of their immediate neighbors and the broader Uinta Basin community. The Uinta Basin has long been recognized as a localized hotspot for high strangeness, frequently referred to in modern parlance as UFO Alley. Beginning in the 1950s, local educators and scientists such as Roosevelt schoolteacher Joseph Jr. Hicks and Dr. Frank B. Salisbury, who was the former head of the plant science department at Utah State University, meticulously documented hundreds of first-hand accounts of unidentified aerial phenomena and unexplainable occurrences throughout the basin. The neighbors directly abutting the Myers property reported extraordinary and deeply traumatizing events during the exact same era that the Myers family claimed total agrarian normalcy. Neighbor John Garcia reported witnessing an anomalous orange object estimated to be the size of a standard house, hovering directly over the ranch's boundary fence line before accelerating vertically into the atmosphere at extreme velocities. Another adjacent neighbor, Charles Wynn, reported a terrifying encounter with a blinding white light. He described it as possessing the visual intensity of an arc welder, but emitting absolutely zero thermal radiation.
Wynn noted that the light approached him so aggressively that he feared for his life, forcing him to dive into a water-filled irrigation ditch and cover his head to survive the encounter. Other regional observers frequently reported anomalous aerial orbs, characterized by blue exteriors and orange centers, which emitted slow-moving sparks as they traversed the sky. The stark divergence between the Myers family's accounts and those of their immediate neighbors suggests several potential sociological and geophysical dynamics that demand careful analytical synthesis. First, rural agricultural communities in the mid-20th century were highly susceptible to social stigmatization. Admitting to experiencing flying saucers or paranormal events often resulted in profound social and economic ostracization, or even institutionalization, as seen in parallel cases of the era like Paul Benowitz. It's highly probable that the Myers family adopted a stance of strict, enforced silence to preserve their standing in the community and protect the commercial viability of their livestock operations, actively avoiding the dreaded label of insanity. Alternatively, a strictly geophysical interpretation provides a different mechanism for this discrepancy. If the anomalous phenomena are driven by localized geophysical triggers, such as tectonic stress, deep crustal friction, or specific ground-disturbing activities like drilling, then the traditional, low-impact, surface-level farming methods of the Myers family may not have provided the necessary kinetic or electromagnetic catalysts to activate the phenomena.
In contrast, the more invasive activities of subsequent owners may have triggered latent geophysical mechanisms that lay dormant during the Myers' gentle stewardship of the land.
The next chapter in the ranch's story, and arguably its most transformative, began in 1994 when Garth Myers sold the property to Terry and Gwen Sherman. This family, often referred to in early literature and scientific reports under the pseudonyms Tom and Ellen Gorman to protect their identities, had a simple intent: to breed prized, highly valuable hybrid cattle. Instead, their brief, turbulent 18-month occupancy served as the primary catalyst that transitioned the property from a localized rural legend into a subject of intense global anomalous research and, crucially, government scrutiny. Almost immediately upon occupying the property, the Sherman family reported a relentless, escalating series of terrifying phenomena. These included the spontaneous manifestation of massive, anomalous crop circles in their pastures, the frequent appearance of structured UFOs and luminous orbs, and localized magnetic fields powerful enough to cause physical disruption. The biological and economic impact on their livestock was devastating. The family reported the systematic and repeated mutilation of their prized cattle. These mutilations were not characteristic of natural predation by coyotes, cougars, or scavengers. They were described as highly surgical, utterly bloodless, and executed with an anomalous precision that defied conventional veterinary explanation. One of the most defining and frequently cited incidents reported by the Shermans involved a daylight encounter with an extraordinarily large wolf-like creature, often described in literature as a dire wolf.
According to the family's testimony, this massive entity approached their livestock corral, when Terry Sherman fired upon the creature at close range with a high-powered rifle in defense of his animals, the entity allegedly absorbed the ballistic impacts completely unscathed, showing no signs of bleeding, kinetic transfer, or biological trauma. It simply departed the area calmly. Other reports detailed encounters with entities described as having piercing red eyes that seemed immune to physical confrontation, adding to the sheer impossibility of their experiences. Furthermore, the Shermans reported spatial anomalies that openly defied standard physics. According to later accounts relayed to intelligence officials, Terry Sherman described witnessing a hole in the sky, a spatial tear where he could observe a different time of day or an alternate reality, a bizarre window from which unidentified craft would frequently emerge and disappear. The immense psychological toll and financial devastation wrought by these relentless, inexplicable events ultimately forced the Shermans to abandon the property in 1996. However, prior to their complete departure, they broke the decades-long silence that had characterized the property by disclosing their harrowing experiences to local investigative journalist George Knapp.
Knapp, recognizing the profound significance of their testimony, published a highly influential series of groundbreaking articles in the Salt Lake City Deseret News and the Las Vegas Mercury in June of 1996. These articles effectively introduced Skinwalker Ranch to the broader public, coining the modern moniker and, critically, drawing the immediate, well-funded attention of the aerospace and intelligence communities. This media exposure forever altered the trajectory of the property, launching it into an entirely new era of investigation.
The widespread publication of George Knapp's reporting immediately captured the attention of Robert Bigelow, a billionaire Las Vegas real estate magnate, aerospace entrepreneur, and a deeply committed UFO enthusiast. Convinced by the severity of the cattle mutilations and the compelling physical trace evidence reported by the Shermans, Bigelow rapidly mobilized. He purchased the 512-acre ranch in the fall of 1996 for a sum of $200,000. Bigelow's acquisition marked a profound paradigm shift. It initiated a highly funded, heavily guarded, and deeply secretive era of institutional scientific surveillance. Under the auspices of his newly formed National Institute for Discovery Science, or NIDS, Bigelow deployed a rapid response team to the property. This team was uniquely multidisciplinary, comprising PhD-level scientists, veterinarians, physicists, and retired law enforcement personnel. NIDS established round-the-clock observational outposts across the ranch, integrating early-generation night vision, magnetic sensors, and stationary video surveillance in a concerted attempt to capture empirical, quantifiable data regarding the claims. The NIDS deployment yielded profound observational data, culminating in the 2005 publication of the seminal book Hunt for the Skinwalker: Science Confronts the Unexplained at a Remote Ranch in Utah, co-authored by NIDS science administrator Dr. Colm Kelleher and journalist George Knapp. Despite cataloging dozens of close-range encounters with luminous orbs, invisible entities, shadow creatures, poltergeist activity, and magnetic disruptions, the NIDES team frequently admitted to the inherent difficulty of capturing replicable physical evidence suitable for mainstream, peer-reviewed scientific publication. The phenomenon repeatedly demonstrated a hallmark characteristic of what researchers termed trickster behavior, seemingly anticipating the placement of surveillance equipment. Anomalies would deliberately occur just outside the field of view of stationary cameras, or the phenomena would actively drain camera batteries and disable sensor arrays mere seconds prior to manifestation. This apparent precognitive or highly reactive intelligence frustrated standard scientific methodologies, which rely heavily on predictability and controlled repetition. The investigations at Skinwalker Ranch eventually reached the highest echelons of the United States defense apparatus. The Defense Intelligence Agency, or DIA, subsequently funded the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program, known as AWASP, a massive $22 million intelligence initiative managed by Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, or BASS. It's crucial to understand that AWASP was not solely focused on standard nuts and bolts UAP sightings, such as the famous Navy Tic Tac encounters.
Instead, it deeply and formally investigated the bizarre, multidimensional phenomena occurring at the ranch, operating under the premise that understanding these anomalies was critical to national security. During its 2-year operational window, the AAWSAP program generated over 100 highly classified technical reports, some spanning hundreds of pages, which were delivered directly to the DIA in Washington, D.C. These included detailed analyses of global UAP intelligence, including a comprehensive 149-page report on Soviet and Russian UAP tracking capabilities, and intricate details regarding the design and construction of functional prototypes for autonomous UAP surveillance platforms. The program extensively researched exotic propulsion, wormholes, anti-gravity, invisibility cloaking, and fusion technology, explicitly attempting to reverse engineer the physical mechanics observed at the ranch.
Perhaps the most significant, disturbing, and paradigm-altering finding to emerge from the AAWSAP and NIDS era is the documentation of what researchers termed the hitchhiker effect. Military intelligence personnel, DIA officials, and scientists deployed to Skinwalker Ranch frequently experienced a form of localized, anomalous contagion. Upon completing their deployments and returning to their homes, often thousands of miles away on the east coast of the United States, these defense personnel reported terrifying eruptions of severe poltergeist activity within their own domestic households. According to Dr. Colm Culliher, the hitchhiker effect manifested rapidly. Researchers noted that small lighted orbs of various colors, frequently blue or red, would begin floating through their homes. This unsettling activity quickly escalated to the sudden, violent displacement of physical objects, the slamming of doors without explanation, and auditory hallucinations of footsteps echoing through empty rooms. Most alarmingly, the contagion extended beyond the researchers themselves to their innocent family members, culminating in the appearance of tall, black shadow entities standing at the bedsides of the researchers' children. These terrifying visitations occasionally resulted in unexplained physical injuries, severe autoimmune responses, and deep psychological trauma for the children involved. This vector of transmission suggests a profound shift in how anomalous phenomena must be categorized.
The hitchhiker effect implies that the phenomena at Skinwalker Ranch are not strictly bound to geographic coordinates or geophysical mechanisms of the Uinta Basin. Instead, they possess an infectious, informational, quantum-entangled, or highly advanced psychological capability to attach to human consciousness and geographically relocate. They act more akin to a biological or cognitive virus than a localized geological event, suggesting an intelligence that can select, follow, and actively torment individuals regardless of distance from the original site.
The scientific investigation of Skinwalker Ranch extends far beyond atmospheric and geophysical anomalies, delving deeply into the realm of acute neuropathology and biological harm. The severe biological effects experienced by researchers, military personnel, and visitors indicate that the phenomena interact directly and aggressively with human neurophysiology, generating measurable long-term biological damage and structural alterations to the brain. Dr. Gary Nolan, a highly respected professor of pathology at Stanford University, known for his definitive genetic analysis proving the Atacama skeleton was human, conducted extensive medical research on a cohort of approximately 100 patients. This cohort primarily consisted of defense, governmental, and aerospace personnel who had experienced close-range UAP encounters or had visited highly anomalous sites, most notably Skinwalker Ranch. Initial MRI analyses of these intelligence and military patients suggested severe brain damage centralized in the basal ganglia. However, closer, higher-resolution neurological evaluation revealed a startling reality. The anomaly was not necrotic or dead tissue. Instead, it was a profound structural overconnection of neurons occurring between the head of the caudate nucleus and the putamen. In an average human subject, the neuronal density in this specific region acts as a baseline, a 1x measurement. In the high-functioning intelligence and aerospace personnel examined by Dr. Nolan, the density was measured at extraordinary levels, 5x, 10x, and up to 15x normal neuronal density.
The caudate and putamen are integral to higher neurological functions, motor planning, learning, and specifically deep intuition, the ability to make rapid, non-obvious cognitive leaps, a trait highly valued in fighter pilots and intelligence operatives. By analyzing pre-encounter MRIs of select patients in the cohort, Dr. Nolan determined that this basal ganglia overconnection was a pre-existing genetic trait, not an injury generated by the anomalous encounter itself. This biological finding introduces a critical paradigm-shifting insight into the nature of the phenomena. Specific genetic phenotypes, characterized by highly developed intuitive neurological structures, may act as biological antennae. This implies that the phenomena may not manifest equally to all observers. Rather, individuals possessing this specific genetic and neurological density are vastly more susceptible to perceiving or being actively targeted by the anomalous electromagnetic fields present at Skinwalker Ranch. While the basal ganglia variations were determined to be genetic, Dr. Nolan's study also confirmed severe environmentally acquired brain damage among the cohort. The effects were devastating. Approximately 25% of the studied patients ultimately died from their injuries over time.
The physical damage presented consistently as white matter disease, scarring where the immune system had actively attacked the brain tissue, which is virtually identical to the symptomology and pathology of Havana syndrome. Dr. Nolan hypothesized that he was analyzing the very first true cases of Havana syndrome, leading to his eventual lockout from the highly classified data to prevent international incidents. Crucially, one specific patient suffered these exact catastrophic injuries directly while operating at Skinwalker Ranch. The sheer depth and severity of the white matter damage allowed Dr. Nolan's team to calculate the exact amount of kinetic and electromagnetic energy required by the wave that struck the individual. The immense magnitude of this energy led Dr. Nolan to hypothesize that the injury was not necessarily caused by an extraterrestrial UAP, but could potentially be the result of a terrestrial state actor, utilizing advanced, highly classified directed energy weapons in the vicinity of the ranch, testing them against unwitting targets. Acute physical trauma is also heavily present among the current investigative team. In 2016, Ranch Superintendent Thomas Winterton suffered a severe, life-threatening scalp and skull injury while investigating the property. Medical and scientific analysis strongly suggested the injury was consistent with exposure to a highly localized, intense gamma-ray burst or directed energy weapon, leaving Winterton permanently hypersensitive to subsequent radiation events on the ranch. Furthermore, independent scientist Dr.
Christopher Segala conducted a rigorous 3-year scientific study specifically focusing on quantifying the aforementioned hitchhiker effect. Recognizing the limitations of subjective human testimony, Dr. Segala equipped known experiencers with advanced environmental monitoring equipment within their domestic homes. Segala successfully documented precise temporal correlations between subjective paranormal experiences and objective hard environmental data. In one highly documented case presented in his findings, a subject experienced a severe night terror involving a black shadow figure traversing their bedroom. At that exact millisecond, the monitoring equipment recorded a massive, anomalous spike in gamma radiation and electromagnetic energy. While strict medical skeptics consistently argue that these nighttime encounters are merely the psychological manifestation of sleep paralysis, a natural state where the brain hallucinates threats due to the body's REM atonia, the corresponding objective radiation spikes recorded by Segala's instruments suggest a genuine, externally generated physical stimulus that operates simultaneously on physical and psychological planes.
In 2016, following the formal conclusion of the AWASAP defense contract, and after 2 decades of intense private study, Robert Bigelow sold the property for $4.5 million to Adamantium Real Estate, LLC. Adamantium was soon revealed to be a shell corporation established by Utah-based commercial real estate mogul and tech investor Brandon Fugel. Fugel, the highly successful chairman of Colliers International in Utah, initially approached the property as a staunch skeptic. His preliminary hypothesis was that the infusion of modern, high-fidelity technology would swiftly debunk the lingering folklore, finding natural, prosaic explanations for the anomalies and perhaps even validating the presence of natural resources. However, within 6 months of ownership, Fugel personally witnessed unexplainable aerial phenomena alongside his security detail, prompting a massive pivot in his methodology and a vast reinvestment in the ranch's technological infrastructure. Transitioning sharply from the profound secrecy of the Bigelow era, Fugel allowed Prometheus Entertainment to document the ongoing scientific investigation. This resulted in the highly popular History Channel series, The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, which premiered in March 2020 and has continuously aired, entering its 7th season in 2025 or 2026. The current investigative team represents a highly specialized, multidisciplinary unit designed to tackle the phenomenon from multiple scientific vectors. The team includes principal investigator and plasma physicist Eric Bard, aerospace engineer Dr. Travis S.
Taylor, who holds PhDs in optical science and engineering and formerly held a key position on the federal government's UAP task force, Ranch Superintendent Thomas Winterton, and security personnel Bryant Dragon Arnold and Caleb Bench. To overcome the observational limitations and battery failures that plagued the NIDS era in the 1990s, the Adamantium team partnered with trusted technology providers to establish a military-grade command and control center directly on the property. The ranch infrastructure now actively utilizes floor-to-ceiling Samsung interactive displays and a hyper-secure video conferencing and data sharing platform known as War Room, developed by Vernet X. The modern scientific methodology involves deploying an exhaustive array of advanced sensors, ground-penetrating radar, or GPR, LiDAR, thermal cameras, drone magnetometers, spectrum analyzers, gamma cameras, and high-altitude weather balloons. Field data is captured on specialized tablets and immediately routed through secure pipelines back to the command center to prevent the data corruption historically associated with the ranch's anomalies. The team regularly conducts highly aggressive kinetic experiments, such as launching high-powered rockets into localized anomalies, deploying intense thermal and laser targeting across the basin, and conducting deep drilling operations into the quartz-bearing mesas, all specifically designed to stimulate and record responses from the phenomena. Recent seasons of the investigation have focused heavily on mapping an invisible force field, referred to as the bubble, which actively interferes with electronics, and tracking high-speed UAPs estimated to be traveling at speeds up to 16,000 miles per hour.
Persistent,
measurable, and highly controversial signature associated with the phenomena at Skinwalker Ranch is the detection of radio frequency signals operating exactly at 1.6 gigahertz, or GHz. During kinetic experiments, particularly when the team drills into the Mesa, launches rockets, or broadcasts countersignals, the investigative team routinely captures this specific frequency via spectrum analyzers. The signal frequently exhibits complex, seemingly intelligent behaviors. It often appears as two distinct signals, gibbering or rapidly communicating back and forth, just off the exact 1.6 gigahertz centerline, creating a distinct alternating pattern on the waterfall display of the spectrum analyzers. The 1.6 gigahertz frequency band is heavily regulated by the FCC and globally allocated for mobile satellite services, including differential GPS, GLONSS, Galileo, space operations, and Iridium satellite telephony. This has naturally led to intense debate regarding the true origin of the signal. Skeptics, radio frequency engineers, and amateur SDR, or software-defined radio, enthusiasts point out that the United States military utilizes line-of-sight flying data hubs that communicate securely with ground assets using the 1.6 gigahertz frequency, with a range of approximately 150 miles. Because Skinwalker Ranch sits geographically in the airspace between Hell Air Force Base and NORAD space complexes, analysts strongly argue that the signal is simply intercepted terrestrial military communication passing over the basin.
However, the ranch investigators counter this mundane explanation by highlighting the distinct temporal correlation of the signal. The 1.6 gigahertz broadcast does not operate continuously, as a standard communications relay would. Instead, it activates precisely when the team stimulates the localized environment and is often immediately accompanied by UAP sightings or catastrophic equipment failures. This temporal alignment suggests two possibilities. Either an anomalous intelligence is actively utilizing human frequency bands to communicate or interfere with the testing, or a highly localized geophysical process is generating targeted radio frequency emissions as a byproduct of mechanical stress. To reconcile the incredibly diverse array of phenomena, ranging from GPS disruption and 1.6 gigahertz signals to luminous UAPs, brain injuries, and gamma-ray bursts, advanced geophysical modeling offers a compelling, unifying, naturalistic explanation. The most robust and scientifically rigorous of these frameworks is the pulsed piezoplasma lens, or P3L, hypothesis. This framework posits that the core anomalies are generated by extreme, natural geological stress acting on the specific geology of the ranch. The underlying physics of this hypothesis relies heavily on the direct piezoelectric effect, a well-documented physical process whereby mechanical stress applied to crystalline structures generates significant electric potentials.
The sandstone comprising the ranch's prominent mesas contains a remarkably high concentration of quartz, estimated at approximately 20%. When this immense geological stack is subjected to significant mechanical stress, whether from deep tectonic friction, natural thermoelastic expansion, or human drilling operations, it acts as a massive natural piezoelectric generator. Rigorous mathematical modeling dictates that a uniaxial stress pulse across a geological stack of thickness d produces an electric potential. Given the standard piezoelectric voltage constant of quartz, a relatively modest mechanical stress across a 10-meter rock face generates a massive electric potential. As this massive electrical charge naturally seeks equilibrium, it migrates upward through microscopic geological fractures. The highly localized electric field within these microfractures easily exceeds the dielectric breakdown threshold of air, ionizing the gas and creating luminescent seed plasmas, often reported as orbs, that vent directly into the atmosphere above the ranch.
Upon reaching the atmosphere, these charge carriers form a horizontally stratified, highly ionized atmospheric slab, approximately 5 to 15 meters thick, suspended tens of meters above the ground. This ionized gas creates a transient plasma lens in the sky. The behavior of this lens and how it interacts with human technology is governed by its fundamental plasma frequency. Based on the geological parameters of the ranch, this calculation places the fundamental plasma frequency precisely between 1.5 and 1.7 gigahertz.
This specific mathematical alignment elegantly and comprehensively explains the technological disruptions at the ranch. GPS and GNSS satellite signals operate within the L1 and L2 bands, which are near or below this plasma frequency threshold. When these navigation radio waves hit the invisible plasma slab, they are severely refracted, ducted, or entirely blocked, creating the invisible GNSS bubble anomaly, frequently mapped by Dr. Taylor and Eric Ard. Furthermore, while high-frequency optical lasers easily penetrate the plasma, the subtle shift in the refractive index is sufficient to bend laser beams off target by several milliradians, an effect prominently documented during recent kinetic experiments. The P3L hypothesis also thoroughly accounts for the acute biological injuries and sudden radiation spikes. The intense electric fields driving the plasma generation occasionally trigger what is known as runaway electron avalanches, or REA, a phenomenon similar to terrestrial gamma-ray flashes in thunderstorms. When localized electric fields reach immense levels, free electrons are accelerated to relativistic speeds. When these fast electrons collide with ambient atmospheric atoms, they release massive amounts of kinetic energy in the form of bremsstrahlung, or braking radiation, manifesting as sudden bursts of high-energy gamma rays up to several MeV.
This mechanism directly explains the severe radiation burns suffered by personnel like Thomas Winterton. In exceptionally energetic geological events, these gamma rays interact with ambient nitrogen nuclei in the air via photonuclear reactions. This violent process strips neutrons from the atoms, creating the transient, highly localized neutron spikes, occasionally detected by specialized radiation dosimeters at the ranch. Finally, the rapid joule heating of the atmosphere by this electrical discharge alters local aerodynamics, injecting a heat load that explains why high-powered rockets and high-altitude balloons frequently exhibit sudden, unexplained lateral drift when passing over the anomalous triangle region.
Despite the robust technological apparatus currently deployed, the staggering financial investment, and the deep historical involvement of credentialed scientists and government intelligence agencies, the ongoing investigations at Skinwalker Ranch are subject to intense, multifaceted skepticism from both the mainstream scientific community and former participants in the research. Veteran UFO skeptic and freelance writer Robert Schaefer provides a stringent, highly critical evaluation of the ranch's legacy. Schaefer argues that despite decades of continuous monitoring by Bigelow's NIDS and the Pentagon's highly funded AATIP and AAWSAP programs, very little seems to have happened that genuinely holds up to objective mainstream scientific scrutiny. He outright dismisses the hundreds of pages of classified government documents generated by the DIA investigations as speculative, weird science, arguing that they fail to correlate directly with actionable intelligence on UAPs. Ultimately, Schaefer concludes that the much-lauded phenomena at Skinwalker Ranch are almost certainly illusory, driven by folklore rather than physics. Furthermore, the modern transition of the investigation into a serialized reality television format has drawn significant methodological criticism from insiders. Jeremy McGowan, a military veteran and specialized investigator who briefly participated in anomalous research at the ranch alongside the Adamantium team, has publicly and vehemently critiqued the television production process.
McGowan argues that the inherent, unavoidable demands of reality television, which requires rapid pacing, defined narrative arcs, and sensationalized emotional reactions, fundamentally conflict with the slow, tedious, and methodical rigors of the genuine scientific method. McGowan and other critics note that essential scientific principles, such as repeating EMF measurements dozens of times under varying weather conditions to ensure replicability and establish a true baseline, are frequently bypassed by the production team in favor of capturing initial shock value and launching visually spectacular rockets for the cameras. This creates an environment where entertainment value is prioritized over the meticulous gathering of peer-reviewable data. Critics also point heavily to the immense psychological power of suggestion and priming. The highly charged environment of the ranch, combined with the pressures of television production and the pre-existing deeply ingrained folklore of the hitchhiker effect, creates a potent breeding ground for psychological contagion. Under these high-stress conditions, mundane events such as natural radon gas venting from a wellhead, standard military 1.6 gigahertz communications, or the completely normal physiological phenomenon of sleep paralysis causing night terrors are quickly and erroneously misinterpreted by primed observers as paranormal assaults, directed energy attacks, or UAP interactions. The human brain's tendency for pareidolia ensures that researchers actively seeking anomalies will almost certainly find them in the noise.
Skinwalker Ranch occupies a highly unique, deeply contested space at the absolute intersection of ancient cultural mythos, speculative astrophysics, and advanced terrestrial geophysics. The chronological progression of the property demonstrates a fascinating sociological evolution, showing how a specific geographic coordinate can transition from a spiritually quarantined indigenous hazard zone into a quiet agrarian homestead, and finally emerge as a heavily funded, globally recognized laboratory for the United States military and private commercial enterprise. The data collected over the last 30 years of intensive study, encompassing genetic predispositions and basal ganglia connectivity, extreme 1.6 gigahertz radio frequency emissions, verifiable gamma ray bursts resulting in severe biological injury, and the terrifying sociological spread of the hitchhiker effect, indicates that the property is subjected to forces that defy simple, sweeping dismissal. While the integration of reality television production inevitably injects dramatization, compromises strict peer-reviewed methodology, and invites valid skepticism, the underlying physical and biological data remains highly anomalous and deeply concerning. Advanced geophysical modeling, particularly the pulsed piezoplasma lens or P3L hypothesis, provides a vital, scientifically rigorous bridge between the seemingly paranormal and the empirical. By demonstrating exactly how immense subterranean tectonic stresses acting on high quartz sandstone geology can generate atmospheric plasmas capable of defeating military GPS, bending lasers, and generating tissue-damaging radiation, science is finally beginning to unmask the physical mechanics of the ancient skinwalker. Whether the phenomena are ultimately determined to be a highly complex natural terrestrial geophysical engine, a covert staging ground for classified state actor-directed energy weapon testing, or an entirely unknown intelligent interaction, the 512 acres in the Uinta Basin will remain a critical proving ground for the absolute limits of modern scientific inquiry and human perception. If this exploration of the unexplained sparked your curiosity, share it with someone who loves a good mystery.